Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. So it's June. We are halfway through 2023. School is out. Kids are at home. There's less traffic on the road. And people planning their vacations, planning their trips out of town, out of the country even. Even if you got a staycation, you're still looking forward to it. And so in light of this summer season, I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of encouragement on this episode. Because it's easy to get discouraged, especially when you're fighting for climate justice, fighting for environmental justice, fighting for things to be different. It's easy to look at all the barriers, to look around, to look at all the people who are opposing your work and trying to keep things from being different. It's easy to look at all those things and to get discouraged and to get disappointed and frustrated. And I'm just here to tell you that all that hard work you're doing, that advocacy work you're doing, is going to pay off. It is going to make things different. If you think about history, from the establishment of the EPA in 1970, that was under Richard Nixon, who is widely regarded as one of the most corrupt presidents in U.S. history. He started EPA. From that point till now, there have been tremendous changes. There have been tremendous things happening when it comes to thinking about how the environment has been protected, how people have been protected throughout history. And I know we're just getting started. We're just now scratching the surface of all the things we can accomplish if we keep pushing and keep working. And so in this episode, I just want to celebrate the W's, celebrate the wins, and encourage everybody listening to continue to keep fighting, continue to keep pushing, continue to keep marching and protesting and advocating, doing all that hard work to get things done and to make things different. So stay with us. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Dr. Joseph. Thank you for listening. So I want to celebrate with you today. I want to just encourage you, and I want to just get you motivated to continue to fight and push forward. I was thinking over the last couple of weeks how all the things that we just take for granted these days, the kinds of things that have changed over the course of history, we just assume they've always been this way. But there was a time where our environment, our communities were much, much more polluted than they are today. The first thing I think about is lead. So we know how damaging lead can be. We've talked about it on the podcast several times. When it's in your water, when it's in the air, when it's being burned, it's in your products. It is a harmful, deadly contaminant. And even though there's lead in our environment now, we're trying to push to get rid of it. The lead piping in our water systems, different cosmetics, different products. There was a time where there was lead in the gas that you would pump at the gas station. And there was lead in paint. It wasn't until the 1970s when lead was starting to be pushed out of the environment. So unleaded gasoline was introduced in 1970 when it became clear that there were significant health issues with being exposed to lead. And so it wasn't until 1996 where leaded gasoline was completely phased out of on-road vehicles. There's still lead in the gasoline in off-road vehicles and aircrafts, but your regular car that you drive to work, when you go and put gas in it, is unleaded because somebody fought hard to ban lead from that gasoline product. And you can imagine at the time, I'm sure it was very controversial. I wasn't alive back then, but if things are back then like they are today, I imagine there were big chemical companies trying to convince us that lead's not so bad. And that a little bit of lead won't hurt. And the economic cost of getting rid of lead would be too much. And so we need to keep it in our gas, keep it in our paint, keep costs down, continue to use it. Think about those poor families. They can't afford some fancy unleaded products. We have to keep doing what we're doing. And I'm sure there was heavy pushback when the science was coming out about lead being poisonous and dangerous. And so they kept pushing. The data was clear. The science was out there, the advocates advocated, and they lobbied, and 1996 phased out of the vehicles. But, of course, like anything else, we're in the United States. It's a highly developed country, and we can do that kind of stuff. But other countries, developing countries, underdeveloped countries, they continue to use leaded gasoline for a long time. And so it wasn't until 2002 that the United Nations stepped in to work with these governments in these smaller countries to get lead out of gasoline because of how harmful it was. And it wasn't until July of 2021 where the last country used up their last amount of leaded gasoline. And it was at that point where there was no more leaded gasoline in the world, in vehicles. And it was a big victory. And it's a big milestone. And it was the kind of change that definitely helped all communities, but especially vulnerable communities of color, low-income families, people who couldn't afford to deal with the impacts of lead and that exposure. Because you're breathing it in every time you pump gas. You're breathing it in whenever you go home. There's lead in your paint. And so all of those changes made a big difference. The United Nations estimates that by phasing out lead from fuel, that we saved as a whole around the world $2.4 trillion each year. Because you lower crime rates, you improve health, and you prevent millions of premature deaths from lead exposure. That's how big of a deal it was. And so getting lead out of our gasoline, I'm sure, was a hefty, challenging ordeal, but it got done. The same thing with lead paint. It was in 1971 where the Lead-Based Paint Poisoning Prevention Act banned lead paint from public housing. And then later on in 1978, they expanded it to private buildings and homes. And so now you can't build a house with lead paint. You can't even produce lead paint to build with. You have to use some other kind of paint. So that was a big W for all of us and for people who couldn't afford anything other than what was available out in the marketplace. And so it leads us to understand this, though, that if you live in a house that was built before 1978, there is, in all likelihood, lead paint in your home. And even if you paint over it, which I'm sure you'll have to do, because you won't pass inspection unless you conceal that lead paint. If you chip, if you scratch the walls or the corners of the windows or the doors and expose that lead paint, or the chips break off and you have small children, you have pets that are exposed to it, they can get sick just like anybody else. And so we have to still be careful and still be mindful of that fact that having older homes can still lead to potential lead exposure due to the legacy of lead paint in our housing. But even then, it's still better than new construction, new homes, new buildings being built with lead paint in them. Nobody wants that. And so just think about that for a second. There was a time in the world where there was just lead everywhere. Lead at your house, lead at the gas station, lead in all your products. But we are, and I say we, the people who are fighting and advocating for changes, they're the ones who are responsible for these lead paint and lead gasoline bans across the United States and across the world. It's a big win. And I'm excited about that. I know we continue to do more and continue to work towards getting rid of lead in our environment. I know there's a big push now to get lead piping out of our water systems. And the lead and copper rule has been revised. And so we are seeing consistent action towards getting lead out from under us. So we're not going to be exposed to it in any capacity. And so that's a big win. We should celebrate those kind of things and continue to push, knowing that things can get better with our advocacy. Here's another one. So when I was growing up back in the 90s, late 80s, the big talk was about the ozone layer. I don't know if you remember this discussion, but we would always talk about the ozone layer going away. And the big issue was chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs. Do you remember CFCs? You might not even know what they are. They're hydrocarbons that were in styrofoam. They were in aerosol like hairsprays and different kind of air fresheners. And we all were told and we all knew, the scientists kept telling us that those chemicals were depleting and eroding the ozone layer in the atmosphere, which would let more and more sun in, more and more heat would come and global warming would continue because that barrier, that ozone layer was being depleted. And so day after day, year after year, we talked about styrofoam, banning styrofoam cups. Don't use your styrofoam cups. Stop spraying your hair with this hairspray. So many different things that we would talk about because we knew that this was an issue. I was in school at that point. I wasn't in any kind of official, there's no way I could have done anything in my mind. We just talked about it. But it became common knowledge that was an issue. And so in 1994, those products were banned. CFCs were banned from sale, from production, and it was eradicated from our consumer markets. And as a result, since we now know what damage was being done, once we stopped using those CFCs, the ozone layer began to repair itself. And as a result of that, scientists are saying that we were able to protect our crops and guard against damage to the ecosystems, the marine ecosystems and the terrestrial ecosystems. And so as a result, the UN is saying that we received $1.8 trillion in global health benefits and $460 billion in avoided damages to our agriculture, to our fisheries, and to our materials by banning CFCs and phasing them out of the world. And so we can actually do these kind of things. This is not foreign to us. We can actually speak up, speak out, and ban harmful products and harmful chemicals from our environment. We have data, we have researchers. All we need is the will and the fortitude to continue to push for those changes. That's another example in the 90s. So I was actually alive for that. So now if you ask somebody what a CFC is, they probably can't tell you because they don't even know what you're talking about because it was banned because of how harmful it was. So we have a track record of operating in ways that protect our environment, that fight for justice, and that allow people to flourish. We can do it. And that's just on the chemical, kind of on a global scale, where we're talking about things kind of being different for everybody. But if you look even closer at the environmental justice movement and the work that's been done to address those concerns specifically, we have tons of victories. The movement even began in North Carolina in Warren County, 1982. They were trying to build a landfill, a hazardous waste landfill in Warren County that was going to have PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, dumped into this landfill in this predominantly black county in North Carolina. The community fought against it, pushed against it, and they were able to keep that from being built in their community. And that action is widely regarded as the beginning of the environmental justice movement. The movement began with a win. It began with a victory, which then encouraged others to continue to fight in their communities for the same kinds of changes. It wasn't as though people were fighting, losing, losing. The movement begins, we're losing, we're trying to get some traction, we're losing. In actuality, winning is how things got started. Keeping these facilities and these industries away from these vulnerable communities is how the movement began. And so think about that. When you then think about some of the other things that's been happening around the country, around the world, I'm thinking in my mind, Cancer Alley, so many chemical plants, so many industries on that strip from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. The pollution is so high. The cancer rates are 50 times higher than the national average. But even in that arena, last year, 2022, the local groups on the ground were able to stop 2 massive plants from being built on Cancer Alley. The South Louisiana methanol plant, which would have been the biggest methanol production plant in North America. It would have emitted over 2 million tons of greenhouse gases every year. And the neighborhoods around it would have been decimated by their activity. The communities, though, they stopped it because of their advocacy, because of their protest and their petitions, and they got it to stop. Another plant, the Formosa Plastics plant, it was going to be this massive billion-dollar complex, and it was going to double the amount of air pollution in the area. It was going to far exceed any other plant in terms of pollution in the country. The estimates were that the pollution from this plant would be the equivalent of 3.5 coal-fired power plants. That's what they were trying to build in this area, and the people stopped it from happening. Those are big wins. Those are big victories. I want people who are listening to recognize how big of a deal that is. That big multinational global corporations trying to dump in the same place where they've always dumped are no longer able to do so. It's a tremendous victory. Another place I'm thinking about is the Virgin Islands. In the Virgin Islands, they have tons of refineries. And there was one refinery, the Lime Tree Bay refinery in St. Croix, which was shuttered in May of 2021 because our island residents organized. They showed the impacts to their health from the plant, and they got them to stop production. And so they had to shut down the facility. They were waiting to get their permit renewed. And last year, they tried to get their plant back open again. The EPA said, no, you need a brand new permit. We need new analysis, new calculations before you can even think about reopening. So the EPA stepped in and stopped it. Now you might say, oh, thank you, EPA, we appreciate it. But in reality, the EPA is responding to the residents who are organizing and fighting against the power plants, fighting against the refineries. That's what's happening. It isn't as though the EPA is coming in with a benevolent approach looking to shut down refineries. They hear from the residents, they understand the concerns, and they're responding to that. And so that is something that we can hold on to when we think about our own advocacy work. We think about what we can do to make changes. No matter where you are, no matter who you are, you have the ability to raise your voice, to organize, and to push back against heavy polluters who operate with complete disregard for your health and well-being. You can do that. Any of us can do that. The data is out there. The science is clear. All we need now is action and mobilization across the board. And so you keep doing that. We keep pushing. We keep fighting. We keep talking about it, and we will make things different. We can do that. So be encouraged. I don't know where you are, where you live. I'm not sure what you're fighting for, what you're trying to prevent, what you're trying to bring to your communities, but keep going. I know you can do it. I've seen it done. I'm reading about it. I'm hearing about it. I know it can happen. So many things we want to do, things that we want to see. We can continue to do it. And don't sell yourself short. Don't settle. Don't think that, oh, let me scale back on my demands and on the things I want to see because I know they won't do it. Don't do it. Continue to push what you know is right. I was looking at some articles online. There's a website called The Global Citizen. They published this list of what they call extreme bans around the world. And so they were highlighting these really strict, really strong approaches to dealing with the issues that are going on in different parts of the world. And so one of them was a ban on fishing. So we know that our fisheries, our oceans, they're overfished. We're taking out too many fish at once. And so there's a small island in the Pacific called Palau, and they've got this no fish zone off their shore where you just can't fish there. It's just not allowed. It's banned. And I can imagine how people would respond here if you banned them from fishing in a part of the country or in a part of an ocean near the country. People will probably say that would never be possible. But if you get to a point where you know it needs to be done, anything is possible. Anything could happen. And so this island banned fishing. Think about that. Another one was a ban on cars, on actually driving vehicles. So a lot of major metropolitan areas around the world, they get so congested because there's so many people and the cars are so polluting that there'll be times where it's just too much, it's overbearing. And so they'll actually ban people from driving for certain parts of the day, for certain days of the year. You just can't do it. In Paris, in Barcelona, Spain, New Delhi, Beijing, they said, look, on these days, we're not driving vehicles. We're not going to have this massive amount of pollution just dumped at this point in time because we're trying to get from one place to another. We are banning cars from driving. So it can be done. People are doing it. They're looking at the situation. They're deciding what actually needs to be done, and they're asking for that to be done. They're not pulling back. They're not scaling back. They're going for what they know is needed in their communities, in their cities. Another one is a ban on plastics. So I know how we feel about plastics in the United States. We love our plastics. Plastic bags, plastic wrappers, plastic cups, straws, forks, spoons, plates, plastic containers, plastic everywhere. Well, other countries have banned different kinds of plastic. Morocco, Kenya, Rwanda, places that have significant amounts of plastic pollution, they have complete bans on plastic bags. You just can't use them. You just can't bring them. They're not allowed. France, they've banned plastic cups, plates, and silverware. Just banned it. You can't use them. I wonder what they are using. I guess they're using actual regular silverware and washing them, but no plastic. New Delhi, India, no plastic at all. They've completely banned plastic altogether. Think about that for a second. Think about living without plastic. It is possible. We don't have to have plastic. And if you feel strongly about it, we can ban it. We can tax it. We can do things to reduce our plastic usage. People are doing it around the world. So why not us? We can do those kind of things. So I don't know exactly what you're fighting for, but I want you to be encouraged today. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, continue to do it. Continue to work. Keep doing that research. Keep publishing your research. Keep marching. Keep protesting. Keep sitting in. Keep standing in front of those businesses, in front of those corporations. Keep lobbying for legislation to be passed, for things to be different. Keep the fight. Keep going. It's going to pay off, I promise you. And change has always taken place from the bottom up. That's always been how it goes. It's never top down. Never. Don't let anyone tell you that it took a president, it took a senator, it took a person in a high position to get these things done. They were pushed. They were motivated because there was a groundswell of people who pushed them to do the right thing because their job would be on the line. They didn't do it. We know that for a fact. I can promise you, I wasn't around in the 70s, but I'm pretty sure nobody thought that Richard Nixon would be the one to start the EPA. Nobody thought about that. Nobody thought that his administration and people that came after him would be the ones to ban lead paint, to ban lead gasoline, to do the kinds of things that we've seen done. And I'm sure in the 90s, there were tons of corporations, tons of manufacturers, tons of lobbyists who did not want CFCs banned for any reason. But it still happened. And even today, we see grassroots organizations stopping multi-billion-dollar factories. All around the world, we're seeing governments recognize how important it is to deal with environmental degradation and environmental injustice and pollution and all the health problems that go along with it, especially in marginalized parts of the world. And they're making the changes. They're actually passing laws that make changes. So it can be done. And there's still work to do. We still have a lot that we need to get done to really have a just, clean, healthy environment for everybody. There's a lot of work to do, right? We still need to get away from fossil fuels. We can't keep burning coal, burning oil, natural gas, constantly thinking that we're going to get away from the impacts that has, not just the pollution itself, the climate change as well, and the contamination that you experience from those industries. We got to get away from that. We need countries that do all the polluting, the big industrialized countries like the United States, where I am. We need our countries to take some aggressive legislative action to confront climate change. Because even though we look at what we're doing and we say we're managing okay, the rest of the world isn't. We're dumping our pollution, our contamination on places who can't deal with it, who are not responsible for all the pollution, for the climate change that we're seeing. It's just a fact. We have to do something about that. We have to take the lead and make things different. We need to think about plastic pollution. How are we going to address that? What are we going to do to limit the amount of plastic pollution that we see around the world? Right? We need targeted investments in fence line communities, frontline communities. They're sitting there looking at all the big industries dump on them, and yet nobody's actually putting in resources in those communities to help them be resilient, to help them address the health issues and address all the issues that come up as a result of living next to a big polluting facility. We got to do something about that. That needs to be addressed in some way. So we got a lot of work to do, a whole lot of work to do. But we're going to get there. The changes are going to come. Things are going to be different. I want you to know that that's the case. Your work, your advocacy, your activism, it is going to pay off. It's going to make this world a better place for everyone. It's going to protect vulnerable communities. It's going to protect marginalized groups. It's going to do so much good. I don't want you to get discouraged. Continue fighting. The changes are going to come. Things are going to get better. And we're going to be the ones that bring these changes to pass. And that's our episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast, where we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.